Hey guys, R4GE here, and today I'm going to show you how you can easily set up a home VPN with Tailscale. Now Tailscale is supported on Windows, Android, Linux, macOS and iOS. Now with Tailscale you can easily connect together multiple different devices even if they're not on your local network without having to do anything like port forwarding. And with the free plan you are able to have up to 3 users and 100 devices on your tailnet. If you need more, there are other plans that you can pay for. Now Tailscale isn't used for actually transporting the data between machines. Instead it uses the information provided by each device to figure out how to directly connect them together, and if no direct connection is available, how to connect the target devices through other machines on your tailnet. This means that once connections between the machines are established, all communication goes between them directly and is encrypted. So in our use case, we can set up a device on our home network that we're going to use as our exit node, so the device that we want all other devices to connect to and go out of, which will then act as a VPN. So for any machine that is part of your tailnet, you will be able to connect it up and then tell it to use the machine that we're going to set up as the VPN server to be used as the exit node, meaning that any communication from your device will then get forwarded on to that exit node and will then go out of there. So for example, say if you're in a different country and you connect to Tailscale and then select the VPN server that you've set up as your exit node, it will then make it look as though you are browsing the internet from home. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be setting up a machine to be used as a dedicated VPN server for Tailscale. So this wants to be a machine you do not use and you do not mind having everything wiped off and just constantly running. And we also need another machine that we can use to download all the files that we need and do the configuration. So this Windows machine that I'm on is what I'm going to be using to download all of the configuration files and installation files that we need, and we'll then use to demonstrate as a client device that we can connect to our VPN server once we have it set up with Tailscale. And then I have a separate older HP machine that I no longer need that I'm going to be using as the VPN server. So the installation is going to wipe all of the data off the drive on the machine. So again, you want to make sure that the machine that you're going to be using as the VPN server doesn't have anything on it that you want, and you can leave it running 24/7, and it has an Ethernet port, as I would recommend that you do connect your VPN server over Ethernet to your local network. If you're not going to be using Ethernet, you will have to make some changes to the config file where it specifies the Ethernet connection. Instead, you would have to change that to whatever other connection that you're using. So I would recommend you use your Ethernet connection. And you will also need a USB that you can use as an Ubuntu boot USB, and potentially another USB just to make it easier to transfer the config files, but we'll get into that more in a little bit. Now I've made a little diagram just to explain what we're going to be doing. So we're going to be using a dedicated machine on our network to be used as the VPN server. So we're going to have our PC, and then on the PC we're going to be installing Flatcar Linux, which is going to be the bare bones OS that we're using. And then on top of that we're going to be using Docker, which will then contain Tailscale as one of its containers. Now the reason why we're using Docker is because with Docker we can then use something called Watchtower to try to automatically update our Docker containers, so that once we've set this up we shouldn't need to keep coming through to automatically update things. It should be able to handle it for us. Now a lot of this information comes from Jake at LMG that has done a video on how you can set up a VPN server on cloud providers, but we do need to make a few changes just to make it work for our local home machine so that we can directly connect through to the VPN and browse it as if we are at our own home. So a link to that video will also be in the description if you want to set up a VPN on a cloud provider. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to come to Tailscale, and then we will just log in. Now on Tailscale, you can log in with multiple types of accounts, or I believe you can set up one, but I'm just going to sign in with a Google account. Now it's important that the account that you use is secure, as if this account is compromised, then they will be able to get access to your tailnet and potentially access your devices. So I would recommend having two-factor authentication set up on the account that you're using to sign in on Tailscale. So I'll just select my account, and then I'll continue, and then this is for personal use. And now it just wants me to download Tailscale. Now I do not need it on this machine, as this machine is just what we're going to be using to download the files that we need, and we're going to be installing the VPN server on another device. But I will download the Windows client just so that once we've set it up I can show you it working on this machine. So if we download Tailscale for Windows, and I'll just quickly run the setup, and now we can click close on that and it should have automatically launched. And as you can see, it's asking us to connect the device to our tailnet. So if we click connect, it will then add it on in Tailscale. And there we go, the login has been successful. So we can now close that tab down. And if we look in our task icon, as you can see, we have Tailscale here. Now if we come back to this page here and then we just skip the introduction, as you can see under the machine section, it has now added this device as Tailscale has been connected and is running on this device. Now if you want to make sure that devices that you add to your tailnet do not get dropped off, you just want to come to the device and click on the three dots and then click disable key expiry. If you don't do that, after 180 days it will drop back off and will have to be reset up. So for now I'm just going to kill off the Tailscale on this device, so I'll just find in the taskbar, right click on it and then just click exit. So now we've signed into Tailscale on our account, we now need to actually install Tailscale onto a drive that we're going to use on our system that we're going to be using as the VPN server. So I'm going to be using Ubuntu for this, so you just want to download a version of Ubuntu that you're comfortable with. I'm going to be using the LTS version here. And then you're going to need something like Rufus just to create a bootable USB, as we're going to have a drive connected to the machine that we want to use, and then we're going to plug in the USB and then live boot it so we can then run the commands to install Flatcar along with Tailscale to the drive on the computer. So I will just quickly go to my downloads and set up my Ubuntu USB. So if I come to my downloads and I open Rufus up, and I'll say no to that, and then I just make sure it has my USB selected. Now, I'm going to be using 2 USB sticks in this tutorial, but you are only going to need one. So you need one to be able to live boot Ubuntu, and then you need a way just to transfer the ignition file that we're going to create to that instance. So if you don't have a second USB, you can always upload it to somewhere in the cloud and then download it. But just to make it easier, I have a second USB. You just need some way to transfer it to the live instance once we boot into it. So I've made sure my USB is selected, and then I will just select my Ubuntu image. And we'll just name it that. So if we now just start and we create our USB, and there we go, it's now finished creating the Ubuntu USB. So if we just close that down, and now we've got that boot USB sorted, I'm just going to unplug it from my machine. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to configure the ignition file that we're going to be using for Flatcar. So Flatcar is an OS that is read-only, so once it's been created, you cannot really make any changes to it, and basically the ignition file is going to tell it what to do and what to install when it first starts up. So we're going to come to Jake's GitHub, and we're going to scroll down to the tool that he has created. So if we click on the configuration tool here, that is just going to give us a way to more easily create the ignition file, and then we're just going to need to make a few changes to it after. So the first thing we need to do is we need to generate an auth key in Tailscale that we can then give to our Flatcar OS so that it can then use it upon installation and can then be added to Tailscale. So to do that, if you come to your Tailscale dashboard, so I'll close that other one down, so tailscale.com/admin, and then at the minute we're in the machine section. Now to get the authentication key, you want to come into settings, then come down to keys, and then you should see this auth key section. So you want to then click generate auth key, and then if you want to add a description you can do, but I'm not going to bother, and you then just want to click generate key. Now importantly, you need to copy this key here. So if I click copy, and then we now click done. So now we have created that key and we have copied it. We're now going to come back over to the config page, and we're then going to paste the key in here. Now I'm going to set my time zone, so if I just click on here and then I select my location, and then I will adjust the update window. So for me, I would like it to occur after 5 and only be up to an hour long. And we will leave the auto reboot after OS update on. And I'm also going to be turning on SSH. So SSH will allow you to remotely connect in to the device. If you're not bothered about that, you do not need to select it, as if you have physical access to the machine and can just plug it into a monitor and go onto it, then you'll be fine. If you do want to enable SSH, then you just want to click that, and we now need to provide a public SSH key. So I like to SSH in through PuTTY, so I'm just going to quickly install that. There are other ways you can do it, but that is what I like to use, so I'm just going to download PuTTY. And now I've installed PuTTY, we now just need to create our SSH keys. Again, if you're not bothered about SSH, you can skip this part. So I'm just first going to create a location where I'm going to save my SSH keys to. So I'm just going to put it in my user, then my user location, and I'm just going to create a new folder named .ssh. And then press enter, and then in this folder is where I'm going to put my private and public key. So as I'm using PuTTY, I'm going to use PuTTY to generate the keys. If you want to use something like PowerShell, you can do if you're going in a different way, but I'm going to use PuTTY as that is what I use to remote in. So if I open PuTTY gen up, and then it wants to be an RSA key, and then I'm going to change it to 4096 instead. You can leave it on its default value, and then I will now click generate. And now we just need to move the mouse across this blank area here to add randomness so that it can generate the key. And there we go, it's now generated us some keys. So this is the public key that we want to copy. So if I just copy all of that and then paste the public key into there we go. And then we want to save both our public and private keys. So I'm going to save the public key first. So I'm going to save it in the location I created, so in my user and then SSH. And you can name it whatever you want. I'm just going to name it cert_pub. And then we will also save our private key. If you want to add password protection, you can. I'm not going to bother. And this time I will name it cert_priv. Again, you can name it whatever you want. And there we go, we now have our keys saved. So now I'm going to close put-ign down, and we can now just click the generate config button to generate our ignition config file. So there we go, that is now downloaded to our downloads. So I'm now just going to open the config file up, and I will use Notepad++ just because it's easier to read like that. And we now just need to add a few lines to it. So I will also open this file in Notepad++. Now this first section here you don't necessarily need to add. All this is doing is changing the keyboard layout. So here where it says set-keymap and it says UK, that is setting the keyboard layout to UK. If you want something different, for example German, you would put DE. By default, if you don't put this in, it will just use the default US keyboard. Or if you want to specifically specify the US keyboard, you can then change that from UK to US. This section should be in the description for you if you just want to copy it. And then this next section is important. Now with Flatcar, instead of calling your Ethernet adapter, so the adapter that is used for your Ethernet cable, instead of calling that ETH0 like most systems usually do, it instead calls it EN01. So we need to put this in here so that every time the machine boots, it will then change our forwarding rules. So instead of trying to forward from our Tailscale Docker container to ETH0, it will then forward it to EN01. So if you just scroll along a little bit, as you can see, it is telling us to delete the forward from Tailscale to ETH and the other way around, and is then adding it on with going from EN01 to Tailscale 0. So if we just select both of these sections and we copy them, and then we come over to our config file and we add them just under the unit section down here that's inside of systemd. So if I just come here and then press enter and then paste it like so, and then I will just fix the indentation with this bracket here, just go back until it's back in line, and there we go, those should be the changes that we need to make done. So we can now just do Ctrl S to save the file, and we can close both of these down. So now that should be our ignition file created. Now I'm going to copy this to a separate USB. If you want to upload it to the cloud and then download it again later when you're in your live USB, you can do. I'm just going to copy it to another USB for simplicity. So there we go, I've copied the config file over onto another USB, so I can close that down and unplug that. And now that should be all of the work that we need to do on this machine. So we now need to transition over onto the computer that we're going to be using specifically for the VPN server. So this machine needs to be something that you don't have anything on that you want, as when we do this install, it's going to wipe everything off it, and it is then going to be just used on our network for the VPN server. So I have another machine that I'm not using for anything that I'm going to be doing this on. So what you need to do is you need to plug in your Ubuntu Live USB and then boot to it. And then once you've booted to that, you then just want to select try Ubuntu so that we can then get into a live environment and run the commands to install Flatcar to the machine's drive. So I'm going to plug the Ubuntu boot USB into this other machine, and I will change my video capture over onto that so that you can see what I'm doing. Right, so now I've turned on the machine that I'm going to be using for the dedicated VPN server, and I've booted into the boot menu with my Ubuntu USB plugged in. So my Ubuntu USB is just this SanDisk one here, so I'm going to select that as my boot option, and then I'm going to press enter on try or install Ubuntu. And now the USB has loaded. We're now just going to select our language, then go next, then select our keyboard input, then go next on our internet connection as we're wired in over Ethernet, and I would recommend that you have your VPN server wired in over Ethernet. If you're doing it over Wi-Fi, you are going to need to change some of the stuff in the ignition file that we created. So where it said EN01, you would have to change that to your wireless adapter name, whatever that is in Flatcar. So again, I would recommend you just wire it in over Ethernet. And then we will select try Ubuntu at this section here. So now if we click close, we now just first want to open up a terminal. So you can either click here and then select terminal, or you can do Control Alt and T. So in the terminal, we're first just going to check for updates. So if we do sudo space apt-get space update and then press enter, and that should be our repository updated. Now I'm also going to do sudo apt-get space upgrade, just in case anything does need to be upgraded to a newer version, and we will say yes on that. This probably isn't necessary, but we might as well just do it. And there we go, that has now done. So now we're just going to open up Firefox, and we now need to get hold of the flatcar script that will install it to the drive on the machine. So if we just come to flatcar.org/docs and then press enter, that should take us to the document section of Flatcar. And then if we scroll down to the bare metal section, as we are installing this directly on a machine, not in the cloud, and we then click on the installing with Flatcar install. So here, as you can see, these are the required dependencies, so we're just going to be running a command to ensure that they are installed, and there is also the script itself that is here. So if we click on this link here, it will take us to the GitHub location, and if we then just copy the URL here, and we then come back to our terminal, and we will just get it to download to our download. So if we do cd space downloads, and then press enter, and then we now download the file. So if we do sudo space wget space and speech mark, and then we paste the URL, and I've accidentally pressed insert on that. And then if you have anything at the start and the end of the URL, you can just use the arrow keys to go back to it and get rid of it. So it wants to start with HTTPS, and then wants to end with install, and then you want it to then be closed with a closing speech mark. So now we have sudo wget and then the URL within the speech marks. We can now just press enter, and it will now download it. So there we go, that's downloaded. So if we come to the files and we then come to downloads, as you can see, it has downloaded the script. Now we also need to make sure that the script is able to be ran. So to do that, we're just going to type sudo space chmod space +x space and then the name of the script. So for us, that is flatcar-install. So if we type flatcar-install and then press enter, and there we go, the permissions should now have been set on the script. Now we need to make sure that the dependencies that were mentioned here are installed. So to do that, we're going to type sudo space apt space update, just to make sure we definitely do have our repositories updated. It's probably not necessary as we've just done it, but we might as well anyway. Then space ampersand ampersand, then space sudo space apt space install space -y space bash space libzip2 space bzip2 space util -linux space wget space grep space core utils space systemd space udev space gnupg2 space gawk. And if we now press enter, it will now search for those packages and install them if we do not have them. And there we go, those have now been installed. So now before we can run this script, we also need to get hold of our ignition file that we created on our other machine. So like I say, I put that on a USB. If you'd put it in the cloud now, you would then want to download it to the live environment. So I will just plug my USB in. So now I have my other USB plugged in. I will just open it up, and I will then drag this generated-config.ign file over to the downloads, and there we go. Now the last thing we need to do before we run this script is we need to make sure we know what the drive of this machine is called. So to do that, if we come to show apps again and we open gparted and we then click authenticate, as you can see on my system, it can detect 3 drives. So SDC is the USB that I've just plugged in for getting the config file. SDB is our live boot USB, and then SDA is my system's main drive. So if you want to check that, you can just click the list and then just go through them. So as you can see, SDC is just a simple FAT32 partition, which is obviously just my USB. And then if I come to SDB, as you can see again, this is Ubuntu 24.0. And then SDA is an already created Flatcar installation that I'm going to be overwriting. If you'd previously installed an OS on the machine that you're using, it would probably look something like this with an EFI partition, but we're going to be overwriting all of that when we run the command, so it doesn't matter if there is anything on it, as long as there is nothing on it that you want, as it will all be wiped. So you just need to take note of the drive name that you want to install. So in most cases, it will be dev SDA, as that is the first drive in the system. So now I've gone over that, we're now going to come back to the terminal, and we're now going to run this Flatcar installer to install it to the system's main drive. So to do that, we're going to type sudo space then then flatcar-install -i then generated-config.ign then -d then and then the name of our drive that we want to install it to. So again, in most cases it will be /dev/sda. So basically what this command will do is it will run the flatcar installer that is within our downloads directory that we're currently in here, and will then tell it to use our config file that we have here as well, and we'll write that to the dev SDA drive that is our system's main drive. So if we now press enter, and it looks like I've just made a bit of a typo, so it is generated-config.ign, not ing. So if I now press enter again, and there we go, it's now going to start trying to install the current version of Flatcar and make the changes specified in our config file here to the main system drive. And there we go, it now says success and it is finished installing. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to shut down our live USB environment. So we will just do sudo shutdown now and then press enter. And we can now remove our live boot USB, and I will also remove my other USB from the machine. And now before we press enter, I'm just going to go over that as soon as we press enter, you then want to be pressing the escape key as we want to try to boot to the recovery, as we're going to need to adjust the boot options so that we can boot to a single user mode and can then set a password on the core account for Flatcar, as by default the core account doesn't have a password set, so there won't be any way to log into it if you wanted to. So as soon as we press enter here, we're then going to keep pressing the escape key on the keyboard to hopefully get into the recovery mode on Flatcar OS. So if I now just press enter and then I keep pressing escape, so I press the power button on the machine and it should now be booting up. And pressing escape gets into the boot up menu on this machine, so I'm just going to press continue to boot and then keep pressing the escape key. And there we go, we've now got to the grub bootloader. So we're going to have the Flatcar default option selected, and then we're going to press E on the keyboard to edit, and then we're going to use our arrow keys to come down and then go left to get to the end of this line here. Now on the end of this line, we're then just going to type -init equals /bin/bash. And now we've done that, we're now just going to press Ctrl and X, and it will save those changes and boot like so. So those changes will only take effect for this one instance. And now it's finished booting up, we can now run a command on the local host. So we're just going to run the command passwd for password, then space, and then the name of the account that we want to set the password for. So Flatcar uses the core user, so we're just going to type core, and then press enter. Then you want to enter a password that you want the core account to have, and then press enter, and then type the password again, and then press enter. Now when you're typing the passwords, it will not show up, but it is being entered. So as you can see, the password has now been updated successfully. So now we just need to manually power the machine off, so I'm going to press and hold the power button on the machine. And there we go, now it's powered off. I can now press the power button again to turn it back on, and this time we will just let it boot normally, so you don't need to press any keys. It should now just boot up to Flatcar. And now it's booted up, we will just let it finish setting everything up. And now it's done that, we can now just log into our account, so we can do core for the user, and then enter whatever password you set. And there we go, that has logged in. So now in theory, our VPN machine should now have been added to our tailnet, so I'm just going to go back over to my other machine, and I will show you that it should hopefully be there in machines, and then go over the few other things we need to do. So I will just switch my video over to that. Right, it's now back on our original machine. We can now come into Tailscale again, and then come to machines, and as you can see, it's now added our VPN server machine on, and as you can see, it has this exit node option here, as within our config file that we created, we told it that we wanted it to be the exit node. So to confirm that, you just need to come to your VPN server, click on the three dots, and then click edit root settings, and then click use as exit node, and then click save. So that should now allow other devices on our tailnet to be able to use this device as an exit node without having to fiddle about with anything like port forwarded on our router to be able to get to it. And again, just like before, I want to disable expiry on the cert, so I'm going to click the three dots and then click disable key expiry, as if we don't do that after 180 days, the key will have to be resorted out. So now I've done that, I'm now just going to go back over to the VPN machine just to check its status, but it should hopefully be up and running now. Right, so now I'm back over on the VPN server. We first just need to make sure that our Docker container is called tailscale. So to do that, we're just going to type docker space ps space -a and then press enter, and that will just show us all of our Docker containers. So if you look at the name section, as you can see, we have a Docker for Watchtower, and then we have a Docker for tailscale. So now just to check on the tailscale status, we're just going to type docker space exec space and then tail scale, as that is the name of the Docker. And then inside of that Docker, we want to run the command tail scale space status and then press enter. So as you can see in our tailnet, you can see our desktop that we have the client on, and we also have our VPN server. Now if you look to the right, hopefully you do not see anything like relay on your VPN server, as if it says relay, then that means it's struggling to figure out a direct connection to your machine, and you're going to have to figure out what it is in your network that is stopping it from being able to directly connect to your VPN, as you don't want your VPN server to have to keep relaying through other devices. You want it to be able to do a direct connection. So as long as you don't see relay anywhere on the line that is your VPN server, then you are good. So now that all looks good, I'm now just going to go back over to my original machine, and we're going to act as though we're with the client and show you how to select your exit node as the client. So I will just go back over to that. So back over on our Windows client machine, I can now start tailscale up again as I previously closed it. So if we come to our taskbar down here, as you can see, tailscale is there, and if we right click on it, we then get these options. So as you can see, it has connected successfully to tailscale, and we can now come to the exit node section, and if it is on none, you can then select your VPN server. So with the VPN server selected as the exit node, that now means all of the traffic on this machine will get forwarded onto that device and will then go out of the VPN server. So any requests that you make will look as though they're coming from the VPN server. So if you're located somewhere else in the world, it will then just send all of that data to the machine that is located at your home, and will then send it out from there. So just to make sure that we can get out, I'm just going to open CMD up, and we will just ping Google's DNS, so 8.8.8.8, and then press enter, and as you can see, it's successfully getting out. And then just to show you, I will also make an SSH connection to my machine, as I did set up SSH. So now as my client machine and my VPN server are on the same local network, I could just use the IP address of my VPN server, or I could come into Tailscale and I could use its address here. So if I just use the address that Tailscale has for the VPN server, and then I try to open the connection, and then I accept that, as you can see, it brings us to my login page. So if I just put core for the user, and then enter my password, and there we go, now I've entered the password correctly. I've now SSH'd into the VPN server and could theoretically make changes to it. And I will just close that session as I don't need it. And then if you ever want to kill off your Tailscale, all you have to do is right click on it and click exit. Now like I say, it is supported on multiple different platforms, so it should work in the same way. You will just need to connect to your Tailscale on it, signed into the same account that you set your Tailscale up with, and then select your exit node as your VPN server. So guys, hopefully that worked for you. If you liked the video, don't forget the like button. If you decide to hit the dislike button, subscribe for more content like this, and I'll see you another time. Bye.